Brethren, let us pray. Wow. Well, thank you all for coming. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love your will.
I'm going to start by thanking Terry and Sherry and Keith and William for Emily and Ed for assembling this crowd. I'm really honored to have all of you here. My daughter Rachel would have been here, but she got a job yesterday, so she's working. But I went over the talk with her this morning and practiced, and she wanted me to say that this is a Rachel-approved talk, which is a 17-year-old ain't bad. I also wanted to mention that after the talk, for those people who are interested, there's a Gnostic Mass that will be taking place, and there'll be a book signing, and we'll have a nice visit. I think the Mass is starting at 8 or
8:15.
Whenever. So we'll have, for anyone who would like to see a Gnostic Mass, you're welcome to come. There are some rules about it involving taking communion. So for those of you who would like to, the people will explain after my talk what the rules are. But it's a very beautiful ceremony, and you're all welcome to attend, and it would be lovely to have you. Now, I was going to also add that there's more politics in this talk than there is in the book. So if you want to, if you don't like politics, you'll love the book. And if you do like politics, you'll love the talk. So I guess with that we'll start. Modern American culture may be characterized as disposable. We await the expiration of our cell phone contracts to replace working phones with snazzier models. Serviceable computers are abandoned for the endlessly trumpeted advances that complicate an already frenzied learning curve, and whose utility is at least questionable. Yes, it has more memory, but the programs consume more memory. Strange how that works. Especially for those of us who are back with the 360K discs in the beginning. Many people these days don't even bother to marry before having children. Disposable lovers discarded. We are increasingly becoming a nation of one-parent households. The iconic single mom trumpets her out-of-wedlock births as the new norm, and daddy is replaced by the government with food stamps, state-run daycare, and aid to dependent children. The only passionate advocates for marriage these days seem to be gay. Why do you think this has happened? Our cultural elite and political masters seek the destruction of the family because the family is the first competitor of the state. Why else do they now seek to incarcerate even preschool children in their government indoctrination centers? Let's get them before they're potty trained. As if the monopoly on education from the ages of 5 to 17 is not enough. But mom can't be trusted to make a sandwich, and dad certainly not to teach hunting. We must especially not allow children to be raised with alternate moral values to the secular society that we've built. The Bible's answer: honor thy mother and thy father. Our math and language skills continue to dwindle as the omnipresent television set broadcast images of ever-devolving and degenerate lifestyles, where bleeped obscenities replace poetry as the expression of the inmost recesses of the superficial souls. The so-called sexual revolution has profaned intimacy and redefined sex as a mechanistic rubbing of robotic entities devoid of spirit. Sex has been further blasphemed as a means for the enhancement of ego and the marketing of products. The intrinsic value of the individual and privacy are held to be naught. Commitment is meaningless. The Bible's answer: thou shalt not commit adultery. America's constitutional republic is being transformed by an ever-growing pernicious populism in which Warren Buffett's secretary has replaced Betsy Ross as the iconic American woman. The quiet, self-effacing, productive patriotism of yesterday is replaced by the avariciousness of victimhood. While Buffett's secretary only owns 2 homes, her boss owns more. Not fair. Meanwhile, that cynical billionaire is keeping the media hyenas and their Occupy shills from his front door with calls for taxing the rich, while his Berkshire Hathaway company has not paid the $1 billion in back taxes it owes the IRS. Level the playing field, or the rampaging peasants with their pitchforks, ululating, blood-curdling paeans of envy will be fastening their teeth into the necks of the wealthy. Eat the rich. We are indeed the ones we've been waiting for since the French Revolution, when maddened Parisian mobs gutted the king's Swiss guard and fashioned turbans from the intestines of the dead soldiers. In a drunken frenzy of bloodlust, hatred, and resentment, the Bible's answer: thou shalt not covet anything that is thy neighbor's. A narcissist who managed to publish 2 autobiographies by the age of 42 is inaugurated in a frenzy of screaming, stamping, and chanting while the constitutionally protected media drool and thrills run up their legs. The cult of personality sweeps the body politic. Standing between styrofoam Greek columns, speaking through reverb-enhanced microphones, we are assured when now is the moment when the sea levels will fall and the earth be healed. What was designed to be a sober and orderly transition of 1/3 of the national government, and the national government is only a portion of the federal system, intended to be the weakest link in a series of competing multiple governing entities, has become a messianic movement from which America will be lucky to recover. The Bible's answer: thou shalt have no other gods before me. These examples may offer good reasons why budding magi like ourselves should be concerned with a 1,000-year-old book written by a group of anonymous authors who sometimes claim to be speaking in the name of God himself. But the book of the law tells us to curse the old religions. Why am I telling you the Bible is worth studying? That it is a treasure trove of Western civilization whose timeless message still holds the keys and clues to our modern salvation. Have you by chance wandered into the presence of an old-time biblical prophet? Or worse yet, some humorless lunatic whose preaching the end of times are upon us? Whatever happened to sex and drugs and rock and roll? Take heart. I am not come to rebuke you or to enslave you. I bid you not turn from your voluptuous ways, from your idleness, from your follies. But I bring you joy to your pleasures, peace to your languor, wisdom to your folly. I am come against sorrow, against weariness, against them that seek to enslave you. And there are many that seek to enslave you. They wait patiently for the very second when your self-respect and hunger for independence can be replaced by the self-indulgent luxury they have been cultivating in you for generations. When your will to liberty can be subsumed by their promise of security. The moment a free people is willing to surrender itself to tyrants in happy-faced masks, promising endless goodies in return for your subservience, that is the instant when freedom dies. There is nothing new under the sun, writes the author of Ecclesiastes. Earlier in the Bible, we are told by the prophet Samuel that God does not want his nation to set a king over itself. He will take your sons and appoint them for his chariots and to be his horsemen. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries and to be cooks and to be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards and even the best of them and give them to his servants. Anybody hear Cylinder out there? And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king which ye shall have chosen. And the Lord will not hear you that day. Be warned. There is a caveat to liberty. Freedom is not free. It is a two-edged sword. It must be earned and guarded. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. But even more than vigilance is required. Remember that those who refuse to govern themselves are invoking the tyrants to govern them. Sacred liberty is only possible for a moral and self-disciplined population. People whose egos and desires are capable of being surrendered to their true wills. As John Adams, America's second president, wrote in a letter to the officers of the Massachusetts militia in 1798, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. When we compare Liber Oz to the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution, We understand that the United States is designed to be governed as a thelemic nation. Thus, we might go so far as to paraphrase Adams. Thelema was made only for a moral and religious people. Those who are not are wholly inadequate to be its adherents. What does Crowley have to say about this? He calls "do what thou wilt," and I'm quoting him, "the most sublimely austere ethical precept ever uttered, despite its apparent license." Sublimely austere. This is beginning to sound suspiciously like Adams. What then is the message of the Bible, this guidebook for a free people? Since we're here today for a look at Solomon's temple, let's seek within the temple itself for an understanding of liberty. We should begin at the beginning. After God created the heaven and the earth, we must pause for a brief digression. For tonight, or today, let's think of God as that which is referred to in the Declaration of Independence as the Creator, the source of our unalienable rights. This is not rocket science. Soon after the heavens and earth, land and sea, vegetation, animals, and humans enter our story, the Creator placed Adam and Eve within the Garden of Eden. Now, this was a pretty cool arrangement. God walked and talked with them. There was no need for separation, no work, no hunger. They didn't even feel the need to wear clothes. You all know that the serpent tempted Eve to taste of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and become as God. This really irritated him. Competition with an evolving group of potential equals was apparently not in the plan. Now we need to pause again for another moment to talk about God. There may be a difference between our Creator and the God of the garden. I don't want to be burned at the stake for talking about this. But Gnostic heretics have long claimed that the God of the garden was the demiurge, a lesser deity whose resentment of Adam and Eve and their desire for freedom, knowledge, and power is indicative of his own less than stellar nature. Some have even posited that the Bible itself gives a hint of this by identifying the serpent in the garden as the Messiah. The gematria of both of their names equals 358. Proponents of this heresy state that when the serpent bade humanity to become as gods, he became the true hero of the garden drama, the great liberator. The Creator, as discussed in the first 31 verses of Genesis, is a vast, impersonal, mysterious being who doesn't get irritated or feel threatened or make petty rules like the God of the garden. But since the Bible only hints at the difference, and since our Cathar brothers and sisters, among many, many others through history, have gotten into a whole lot of trouble for these kind of thoughts, let's make an agreement. For the purposes of this talk, I'll use the term our Creator, the God of the garden, and God interchangeably. The most astute among us will realize that I reject the drunken, raging father bad archetype that fills most of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, and especially the prophets. As an equal opportunity critic, I'll point out that the New Testament suffers from Paul. Whom I view as every bit as spiritually diseased as any of the worst in the Old Testament. With that bit of scriptural house cleaning out of the way, let's proceed. After the problem with the serpent, God ejected Adam and Eve from the garden. Left on their own, they now had to work for a living and suffer pain during childbirth. They had 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and before they knew it, Cain had killed his brother. Soon after this came the flood. The people had gotten God so angry with them that he decided to kill them and start over. Born to lose. But Noah's Ark also represents a symbolic reappearance of the Garden of Eden. Like Eden, it was separated from the world at large. It was designed on the Lord's plan, and it sheltered those beings chosen for salvation, providing safe haven for the righteous. After Noah and his family safely left the ark for dry land, he built the first altar. Now, magicians know the altar is the point of attention within the defined sacred area of the magical circle. The altar represents the plan of the working at the center of the ritual. In the Bible, the altar similarly is a shrine, a simple collection of unhewn stones designed to focus the aspiration of the created toward the Creator. It separates that which is not God from that which is God. As the Garden of Eden was the home of God, and Noah's Ark was like God's hotel for the worthy, the altar represents the presence of God on earth after the flood. We'll make a long jump here in time and continue our discussion of the Bible with Moses. Here's a guy walking with his sheep one day who runs smack dab into the Lord on Mount Sinai. God spoke to him from the burning bush, giving Moses a set of commands that made him very uncomfortable. But who is Moses to argue with God? Moses reluctantly traveled back to Egypt, as God told him to. After many dramatic events unfolded, he returned to Mount Sinai, this time with about 500,000 Jews that he freed from slavery. Alone on Mount Sinai, Moses was given a new set of instructions. Among these were the 10 Commandments. But our focus for the moment is going to be on the tabernacle, which was the plans of which were communicated to Moses directly by God. The tabernacle was the portable tent in which Moses met with the Lord. It formed the center of their desert camp for the 40 years of their wandering. The tabernacle was a separate, defined, sacred space untouched by the profane. God set a cloud of flame above it. If the pillar of flame remained, the people would stay in the camp. If the pillar of flame began to move, the people would disassemble the tabernacle, pack up their belongings, and follow the pillar of flame to their next destination, as determined by the Lord. Inside the tabernacle was the Holy of Holies, a room behind a curtain. It housed the golden ark of the covenant. Inside the ark were 2 tablets of the law, upon which God had inscribed the 10 Commandments. Now, I'm assuming you all know what the 10 Commandments are, despite the best efforts of your socialist masters to keep them hidden from you. They're on page 60 of my book for quick reference. Considering that the surrounding peoples were eating both live animals and roadkill, and drinking blood, and sacrificing their children, the 10 Commandments was a pretty sophisticated moral code for the day. In fact, it still is. The next time some murderer or robber goes to prison, we can thank the 10 Commandments for having established the legal and ethical code of Western civilization. Now, Moses was on pretty intimate terms with the Lord. He could come and go into the tabernacle as he pleased. There were no restrictions on his communion with God. This reminds us of Adam and Eve in the good old days, before they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. But for everyone else, the situation regarding the tabernacle was different. The high priest was the only person allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, and he could only do so 1 day a year on the Day of Atonement. The Ark of the Covenant would then serve as the throne of the Lord, who would meet with the priest in communion, and as the spiritual leader of the community, the priest's consciousness would be elevated. When the Jews got to Israel and secured Jerusalem as their sacred and eternal capital, King Solomon built the Temple of Solomon as a more permanent version of the tabernacle. That's how we get the Temple of Solomon. The most important part of the Temple of Solomon was, once again, the Holy of Holies. Like in the tabernacle, this room housed the sacred ark, in which were the tablets of the law. In the Temple of Solomon as well, the priest was the only person allowed in, and again, only 1 day each year. Solomon himself could not enter the Holy of Holies of the temple he built. So we see here the evolution of the concept of sacred space. We began in the Garden of Eden, then entered the ark. We stood before the various altars of worship and sacrifice. We communed in the temple. Now the sacred space has become the most magnificent edifice on the highest, most prominent point of the sacred city. The Jews were instructed to gather in Jerusalem 3 times a year for the 3 great communal festivals. We O.T.O people might think of these as like biblical noticons. The people would travel from all points of the land of Israel to bring sacrifice to the temple and celebrate their faith. Once again, God dwelt with his people. In the holy city of Jerusalem, we have entered a new Garden of Eden. And just like the last time, they screwed it up. After 400 years, the Temple of Solomon was destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of the law were never again mentioned in the Bible. 70 years after the Temple of Solomon was burned to the ground and dismantled, a second temple was built on the same spot. It lasted for 600 years. The second temple, too, had a room called the Holy of Holies, but this time it was empty. The second temple is where Jesus taught, where he ejected the money changers, where he forgave the woman taken in sin, and over which he wept, prophesying its destruction. After his death, the temple played an important role in the preaching of the apostles. The very last book of the Bible is the Apocalypse of St. John, or the book of Revelation. John describes the holy city of the New Jerusalem, the celestial city, as a bride prepared for her husband. In the New Jerusalem, there is no need for a temple, as the Lamb and the Lord are the temple thereof. We have at last reclaimed the true status of the Garden of Eden, the unity of divine and human, the presence of God on earth. So what does all this mean to us today? We are presumably a group of sophisticated, cutting-edge, aspiring adepts. What is the direct relevance in our own spiritual lives of this ancient biblical temple? To begin with, you've probably realized by now that the communion with God we keep talking about is the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Similarly, I need not point out to you that Tifereth on the tree of life is the sacred center, where human and divine coalesce, where the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel takes place. The Temple of Solomon is Tifereth. The Holy of Holies is the human heart. The law of God is inscribed within the human heart. The entire point of our system is the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Crowley defined this as the next step, the central theme of his message for humanity. Without experiencing the union of God and man, the presence of God on earth, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel in our own bodies, in the here and now, well, we become very much like those pathetic losers looking for a handout. Warren Buffett's secretary. Never having our fill. Never getting enough. Never being able to satisfy our greed, envy, and resentment. No wonder she's angry. She has never tasted of the divine nectar, without which human incarnation is an abysmal curse, defined by painful childbirth and the need to earn our sustenance by the sweat of our brows. Incarnation as a non-initiate is like living in some rat-infested, garbage-strewn slum of an Occupy encampment. In contrast, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are reserved for a free people, a moral and religious people, aspirants who seek God in every corner of our being, every day of our lives. The real secret of the Temple of Solomon is that it needs to be built within each one of us every single day. The temple, Tifereth, the human heart, home of the sacred law, must ever be cleansed and kept pure. Eternal vigilance is the price of spiritual liberty. Love is the law. Love under will.